Hey, this is David Wolinsky back with another interview from the audio archives of NoDon'tDie.com. This time I'm bringing to you the first half of my Q&A with Niero Gonzalez, who is the founder and publisher of Destructoid, which started in 2006 as his personal blog and is now a popular destination for game reviews, news, and trailers. He and I spoke on July 19th, 2016, and just a quick reminder, if you want to read other interviews I've done, you can go over to NoDon'tDie.com, and also you'll see a link to my Patreon where your support helps me continue this work. And now, here's Niero Gonzalez.
Sure. Well, my name is Niero Gonzalez Pando. I floated over from Cuba in '85, lived in Miami most of my life. Worked in the tech industry here for a little bit. I went to school for arts. I was drawing for a newspaper, and the newspapers started downsizing when the whole internet thing started, and I ended up at an ad agency doing banner ads for terrible people, and I hated my life. I was coming home to escape to video games, as I always did as a child, a lifelong gamer, and I just wanted to go to the big video game convention that I always read about online, E3, this is 2006. So I tried to get tickets for this thing, and they obviously shot me down because I wasn't part of the gaming press. But I was a web designer, so I decided that I was going to start a crazy video game blog. I was going to work on it every day. I was going to just hunker down for 2 or 3 months. And I got my passes, and I enjoyed doing it so much that I just wanted to keep it going. So when I flew out to the con, I had made a robot helmet that looked like my logo to get people's attention about a contest that I was doing on the website. I pulled the video card out of my computer and was giving it away. This is how I was trying to promote my blog. Just it's humble beginnings. It's 2006. And then by showing up in a robot helmet and having a blog that was very off the cuff, I was basically the terrorist. We had like a crazy, like an unmoderated comment section. This is back when the major gaming database sites didn't even have comments on the homepage. We were just wacky, and we were different, and we thought that magazines were evil. You couldn't distrust the old media, and we'll talk about Gamergate later and how I think it's all really ironic. 10 years later, I basically became a publication where I started hiring people to help me with the blog, and then it became more than my blog. It became multi-console, multifaceted gaming publication, and I started discovering different voices in gaming, and those people have gone on to launch their own careers and publications, and it's just been a wild ride.
I mean, I think you had mentioned, I'm going to refer just to a couple of those retrospective Q&As that you did, those two, but I think you sort of jokingly but seriously called it like a media empire.
Oh, me?
You. Yeah. But I think like to people who like don't know like what freelance writing is like, or what like starting your own site is like what does that actually mean? Like a media empire that like you built in the internet era. I think people hear those words, but like what does that actually mean to you, even if it was just like kind of a joke in an answer that you said?
Oh, well, it's people see us as like a big games media. We do serve millions and millions of pages a month. Some of that is obviously monetized with ads, and ads pay for the writers. So we have a very traditional media company, I guess you can say. And as being like one of the larger blogs, that's where the empire comes from. So I at one point I ran 7 different websites. I was co-publishing like a celebrity blog with this other guy. We try to have a movie blog. We try to have a tech blog. Our tech blog was called Nextlust, which we later figured out it was being blocked by all the corporate firewalls because it sounds too much like a porn site.
I was gonna say it sounds like it might be like a series of popular DVDs.
we just thought it was like, oh, we're excited about the next big tech thing. It's Nextlust. No, it's a porn site. So we lost a lot of money on that one.
And so yeah, this is a boring question, but I think so. Just really quickly, just because this is going to be important for a redesign I'm doing later with my site. But where are you usually based out of? Are you based out of Japan?
Yeah, I was based out of Japan for 2 years. I love it there. So being in Japan for a long time is tricky when you have your own company. You can get a work visa, you can get married, you can get work at another company, but they usually want it to be full time. So I was actually part-timing as an ESOL teacher, just for fun. And then I was there 3 months at a time, then I'd come back. So the last 2 years I've been traveling nonstop. I haven't actually had like a permanent home. I've just been between Tokyo, San Francisco, Miami, Los Angeles. I just came back from Taiwan. I was there for Computex. So quite a bit of travel.
Yeah.
It's a nice side perk that's come out of this so-called media empire of mine.
I mean, I still just sort of marvel at the notion that Japan is cheaper than San Francisco, but it doesn't really surprise me. I just haven't heard it articulated.
It really is. It really is.
That's just so shocking, I think. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of a broad question, and there's no agenda behind it at all. But like, as someone who has covered video games for so long, like what's weird to you about the game industry?
I think what always shocks us is the pieces that we put up, especially the long form interviews and the really detailed, like behind the scenes stuff. Nobody seems to want to read that stuff as much as like, Kim Kardashian bumped into a wall while playing Pokemon Go, and then that gets 1 billion views, and we're like, oh. Like, it's like every sensibility in your body just like recoils, and like, it becomes very, very, as a publisher, it becomes very, very tempting to kind of just want to put up like popcorn type headlines all the time. Yeah. And you can't do that, and it's really finding one, it's letting it go that it's okay to do that sometimes. It's not highbrow, but I have to keep the lights on somehow. And then trying to find the money and the time to do the things that you're really interested in, while that other stuff can pay for the party. And advertising is changing, and we can get into that later.
Yeah. So I'm guessing not, since you mentioned the ESL teaching, or maybe that's just sort of a thing you're doing kind of for fun. But I mean, are you full time with Destructoid or part time, or? Yeah. I mean, does Destructoid support you completely?
Completely. It supports 7 of us full time, and then we have another group of people that are just sort of freelance or part time or regional. Yeah, I did the teaching stuff just as like volunteer and to try to help my visa situation.
Gotcha. So, I want to start off by talking a little bit about those retrospective things. So I'm going to make you relive you reliving a little bit. But, you talked a little in those Q&As about people kind of not understanding the value of like coming correct or having professionalism in like approaching people. Like I think you mentioned like the importance of like, being able to have like face-to-face sort of interactions with people where you go from like, another voice on the internet approaching an editor to like a real actual person. But, I'm curious in those circumstances where you do have those people who run into people, like, how do you feel like people who are aspiring writers about games, and you can speak to this today or years ago or how it's changed, but like, how do you feel like those aspiring writers kind of approach the idea of writing about games like incorrectly? Either like they have the wrong attitude or the wrong idea of what it is.
It seems like there's like 2 types, I think. Like you have the inexperienced person that comes in that has these assumptions about the company they're interviewing, and we always say it's easy to play quarterback when you're on the sidelines, right? Right. So some people come into it with like an air of distrust, and they quickly find out that it's a lot harder on the inside, and things that they thought were evil or intentional. They quickly figure out that it's, well, they didn't have the money or the resources, or some miscommunication happened on the inside, and it's not what you thought it was.
Yeah.
And then, on the flip side of that, you have the experienced editor who is maybe too forgiving or has built a personal relationship with the contact and isn't going to deliver the blows or the tough questions that the younger person will. So, yeah, it's not like a reporter interviewing a politician. You have reporters interviewing businessmen, people that are trying to make money, and just the way that everybody goes about it ends up being just not what you expect.
What kind of distrust do you mean when you talk about distrust? Like just general distrust of the media or of specific writers, or what?
I guess the classic case is the reporter that interviews the executive, gets a quote and then feels like they got egg on their face when the opposite happens because of whatever happens at that person's company. And then you have the gotcha headline that follows that. And then, this company is obviously, tricking the consumer. And then, the company's PR company gets in the middle and, kind of sugarcoats it. And I don't know, you never get the full story. Not typically. It's always kind of like he said, she said, and then, everybody kind of throws tomatoes and then they move on to the next headline.
Do it again.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, that's what it is, and that's what Twitter is all day.
Well, what about just people from the audience who maybe read your site or who you've noticed reading other game sites? Like, what do you feel like people who read writing about games don't understand about, the work you guys are doing or the work that goes into it?
Let's see, another classic example is we can get into the Gamergate stuff if you like. There's we're always kind of under the microscope. Did you guys have all the information when you ran the article? Who does the Q&A? Who does the fact checking? And then you have these kind of anti-publication articles that came out that said, well, such and such thing happened, and then you find facts on those sites to be not correct. I think you start, people that aren't doing the work don't understand how easy it is to make a sleight of hand, I guess, until you're actually publishing and having people screenshot and hang on every typo. I don't really think that the average person appreciates or understands the kind of pressure it is to need to get a story out by a certain deadline, and then do the follow up and amend as needed.
Yeah, I mean, you had mentioned in this Q&A, you were talking a little bit about, I think you did a really good job of laying out a lot of the sort of grit and tenacity that I don't think people realize is necessary to just get a chance to go up in the elevator of doing more work in editorial. I think you were talking about bluffing your way into the Jack Thompson hearing, or writing 4 posts before your day job, and then you get home from your day job and you're figuring out what the next day's posts are. It's curious, without naming names, and I'm not looking for shots fired, but can you talk about situations where you felt people were trying to maybe take advantage of your being so enterprising or so ambitious? Without my naming names or anyone, I can remember much earlier in my career, there was an editor at one publication who's now at another who just serially would be taking freelancers' ideas and then just writing them internally after rejecting the pitches. So he'd just take the ideas and write them himself.
Wow, that's classy.
Yeah. I mean, I always question about like, because there's no there's no beef. It's fine. Like I just learned like, oh, you don't pitch that person,
Yep.
and you move on. But I do think like the other side of that is in like people are not aware of that, like this is the kind of stuff that like may be typical or may be common, but I don't know if it's like more common in games than anywhere else. But I mean, do you have experiences like that are similar?
They're very, very few, thank God. But yeah, especially at events where you're basically in a Shark Tank with everybody else is trying to get the scoop, and people talk amongst each other. So I had this one guy who on purpose was very tenacious about feeding just straight up lies to people near my circle, so that my editors are out chasing their tails. I don't know why. I guess it was funny to him. So we quickly learned that person was just and then you have the other side where you think you made a friend, and then that person goes out and you tell somebody something in confidence, and then they go out and they run a story on your info, which is sad. And then the person that gave you the information in confidence now has to face that being public. And we take embargoes very, very seriously, and we're a little that's kind of how like publications kind of become insular, where they're just kind of in their own little bubble, and they don't really work with other publications, because we're carrying loaded bombs from one event to another. There's a bunch of stuff in embargo we can't talk about, and we have to be really careful with who we talk to.
Are you talking about like in that dynamic, like a freelancer or something, like takes information and then just brings it to someplace else, or
that's happened. That's happened. Oh God, that's happened many times. And then
I feel like that would just be a way to like burn a bridge.
It is. And there's certain people we don't offer work to anymore, because we know we'll get sources. We'll establish contacts, and then the work ends up at somewhere else for the highest bidder, because they're a freelancer. And you got to make your money, sure, but you're burning bridges. So
yeah,
you can't be greedy about it.
So I'm not even sure if you remember this, but I think many years ago we were introduced on email, and we had sort of discussed the possibility. This email is not an intervention to remind you about this, but we had talked about like sort of doing like a pre-Colbert report about the game industry, basically. And you had mentioned in your email more recently, you wish that you did have a think tank, and you did have such and such money to do more experimental or different types of things. I think you said like you often can't push the conversation as heavy as you'd like sometimes. But if you had unlimited money, you totally would. So, I mean, granted, you are sort of in like an unusual spot. I mean, yeah, okay, you're traveling around the world because you feel like it, but on top of that, like, you built a game site that was profitable, and not only just for you, but you have, you pay other people's salaries. I mean, I'm curious, like, what ways would you want to branch out if you could, without making it sound like you're teasing your readers?
Yeah, we've never done crowdfunded content. I felt really strongly about having the website being completely free, and the advertising that's on the borders of the website would just pay for the whole thing. I thought that was really cool, and it in my mind that was going to protect me from what happened with the magazines, where they didn't pay attention to online advertising, and then eventually the magazines all went away. I thought I was doing the right thing by going into this enterprise and being part of the system. And that's all changing and going away. And I'm also seeing a trend where very experimental, non-mainstream writing is being funded by crowdfunding. People doing, independent publications through Kickstarter or through Patreon or such sources for different types of games writing. Oddworld, I think, being the most prominent example of that.
Yeah, though that had a very fast half-life.
yeah. I mean, it's you gotta change it up. That's something that I'd like to explore when I have a more clear vision of what that's going to be.
I mean, do you have obviously it's premature and nebulous and just embryos of ideas, but I mean, are you talking about like branching out into different types of topics and subjects, or are you just more interested in being able to provide something in a different sort of package?
With me, it's always been about voices.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of cherry pick which are the features that are going to be successful. I'm always wrong. I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm always wrong. I'm like, we've got the AAA developer and we've got his, he left the company and he's doing his brand new game and everyone's going to love this concept. And then, we get 12 comments and 300 views. And I'm just like, oh my God, we spent, I don't know how much money on travel and, video interview and all that. And I just get bummed. So what I've learned to do is just kind of trust voices.
Yeah.
So I prefer to fund people instead of ideas and have them try to figure themselves out. And then I just kind of like blindly hope and pray that I pick the right people.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we didn't say it, but you kind of like to be an invisible character in all this, right?
Yeah, I'm the worst. I'm useless for video. I'm terrible for podcasts. I'm completely monotone.
I was just gonna say, I realized, for people who maybe aren't familiar, you're doing this interview, but you're usually more of a not pulling the strings, but you like to just sort of provide a platform for other people.
I do. I don't know why that is, but and that's just kind of like my personality.
I mean, I think that's a common thing. I just think that as the role of an editor or a writer has sort of been redefined, there's been a call for you have to do your own PR and you have to really do as much of everything on top of writing as possible, which is just before it wasn't possible to also be a streamer and to also do this and do that. So. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you feel like that's unusual? Do you feel like a dinosaur?
You put it in a really flattering way. I feel like Holden Caulfield, where I'm, I'm just trying to keep the kids from falling off the cliff.
I thought you were saying I had flattered you by calling you a dinosaur, but I was like, how is that flattering?
No, that's I've completely embraced my dinosaurness.
Did you say before how old you were? I can't remember. I think that's usually one of my initial questions. But
yeah, I started Destructoid when I was 27, and I'm 38 now.
You're 38. I mean, so last year at E3, I had someone who's 25 turn to me and say, "I feel so old." I mean, is that a thing? Do you palpably do you feel old? Do people in games make you feel old? Is that a thing you ever think about?
No, not at all, actually. Especially because I go into the studios a lot, and it's people my age, people my senior, guys well into their 50s and 60s that are way more into it than I am, and that makes me feel good.
Yeah. Because absolutely, it's not. I mean, I don't know. Maybe just because games sort of have that baggage, or they did a long time ago, of being only for kids. But I think there's a thing where
well, it could be the YouTube thing. There's a lot of really young YouTubers on the scene now running around at conventions, and they have their young fans are now invited to conventions to kind of get the investors pumped up into the the whole energy of the industry. And if you're not following, YouTubers, and if you're not 90 pounds and jumping up and down for esports, you can feel old.
So, I mean, we're a bit of a ways into this, and it might feel silly to ask this, but for people who like aren't familiar with Destructoid, like, man, I don't know if I've ever really heard someone who runs a game site talk about this, but like, where do you feel like, Destructoid fits into like the landscape of sites that cover games? Like, what is sort of like its distinct purpose compared to, I don't even really think of them as your competitors, but just the alternatives.
Sure. Yeah, and that's really where I think kind of like where we landed. It's a very informal kind of on the sofa with your buddies type of a gaming publication. We're very, very informal. We're almost rude to a degree. It's very off the cuff. I think we're an alternative to very careful and polished gaming coverage, where that's maybe more common, but not as informal as say a Facebook group or a Twitter feed or your casual WordPress site, because we do have that behind the scenes access and we've built the relationship over the years. So we're like a semi casual kind of like a uncle that tells dirty jokes type of gaming publication.
In our emails, you had sort of described it as like, it's like a bar stool that you pull up to just drink a couple brewskis with your friends. Or I think you had also sort of described it, or maybe it was more like the reputation, but you were describing it as like a frat house a little. Am I putting words in your mouth by saying that?
No, and I think that in the early days we were very much a frat house. We were very, I mean, we were all just fresh out of college and stuff, and we had that sort of like college bro vibe, and then we start inviting different types of people onto the site, and we're 10 years from where we were, so we've kind of grown up a little bit. But yeah, it's fratish.
Well, but I think
we're ex-frat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like I mean, I'm curious to hear you talk about it from a couple angles. Coming. I don't think it's really fair to equate video games and game consumption with like just specifically America. But I'm kind of curious to hear like coming from Cuba and coming into games media, like. What do you feel like? How has that kind of changed? Like what like a Western audience expects out of its games media? Like what do they distinctly seem to want to read about that like other parts of the world don't?
That's a good question. I'm really not quite sure, and to be honest, I haven't cracked it. Like we don't know what Asia wants to read about. I'm told it's mobile games, and then I'm told it's esports.
I've been told that, and also like they like to read long form stuff.
Yeah,
I feel weird even saying they. Just I've been told readers in Asia find that more favorable than readers like in the West.
Yeah, I don't really know. I've only tried to write for I guess American, and recently I tried to branch out to UK. We had some UK people. Our number 3 country that reads Destructoid is Germany. So that makes up a big percent of our audience. And then it's Brazil. So I don't really know. I guess I always just approached it from like, what do guys like me like, and am I generic enough to where I can reach a lot of people?
Well, I mean, it's not all on you, but like, can you talk a little bit about like, what are the challenges of cultivating a group of writers and how that's changed over the years? Because I know, you mentioned in that other Q&A, like there is a line you need to be mindful of, like, maintaining your creative freedom and your financial freedom. So, when I ask you this question, like the challenges of cultivating a group of writers, like there's a managerial aspect to this. There's also a personnel side of this as well. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So for the young writers that come in, they sometimes have a chip on their shoulder, and they just want to come in and just guns blazing go after the people who they feel that have wronged them or something like that. So
what do you mean?
They're pick any arch enemy of the gaming industry. The classic one is like Peter Molyneux overpromised. Fable would have XYZ, and then I'm gonna go after the last thing that Peter Molyneux just said, and I'm gonna pick it apart, and that's gonna be our top story for the weekend. And we don't need to do that. So, and then you have the rumors that come in that are just too good to be true, or you have the editor who you didn't realize was like a lone wolf, and as soon as they got their like Watergate story, they want to kind of push that to the homepage as soon as possible while the editor's out for coffee. These things drive me absolutely insane. And it happens, and you picture an organization like Destructoid as we're all sitting in the newsroom, and like I have the keys to the server, and everything runs by me, and there's no surprises. No, I mean that's not how it always works. Things can slip by, and we deal with it. What I feel like has worked for me is we have now what is a 60-page internal wiki about what we aspire to do, how we work, and what we definitely don't want to put on the homepage. And the types of like problem editorial, if you will, that can sort of trigger these things. And that comes with 10 years of being kicked in the head.
Right.
Not going into any specific details about my secret sauce, but you just learn, and every time you hire somebody, you have to tweak it because you're always going to find out that you don't know as much as you think you know.
I mean, there was you mentioned magazines before, but a buddy of mine who used to be my reviews editor at GamePro. Obviously, he's not there anymore because no one's at GamePro anymore. But
GamePro, I still have issue 1.
What was on the cover?
It has it's like a.
Not testing you, I just don't remember.
No, it has like a montage. It's got like a guy with a sword, and there's a football guy. I think it was maybe it was about the Sega Master System games at the time, or the Genesis. It's just this like beautiful painted montage of a bunch of video game tropes.
Buy this. Yeah, well, he had just sort of told me about, like, sometimes he would get people who wanted to review games who similarly had, like, some kind of axe to grind, or, like, they would be like, let me please review this game so I can give it a bad review. And for me, not to take some sort of, like, superior moral high ground, but just like that, even if I was in the frame of mind of, like, hey, I want to really slam this person's work. Like, I'm just sort of surprised you would tell an editor that. Have you run into stuff like that as well?
Of course, sure. We'll have the young editor come in who says, Studio XYZ is the devil, and this is their new game by the devil, and let's figure out what's wrong with it. And and I can just see the comments, in my mind before the article goes up, and I just don't want to deal with it. And then that's also frustrating for the editor coming in. And I see both sides. It's like, you get a job at a gaming publication, and you want to do the review work, and you have these dinosaurs that have been doing the review work for 10 years that don't throw you a bone. Well, you earn you earn your way up to covering the AAA games, or the games that are possibly evil by the people that have wronged you as a child.
Then you just have a good life after that. You have a good, healthy, happy life after that one too, right? Isn't that how that works?
No, so we have a couple of people that look at, we'll call them landmines, if you will, before they go up, assuming that everyone's in the office that day and we're not out in, Los Angeles when the review hits, or editors on the airplane, and embargoes do. Yeah, I mean, you do your best. Sometimes we stumble. What can you do?
Yeah. So I mean, when you first got into like writing about games, I mean, what were you hoping it would be a path towards? I know it was like a passion for you since you were young. I mean, I certainly can remember what it's like, being in awe of E3 and then going from that to like losing track of how many E3s I've been to. But when you started writing about games, like where were you hoping it would take you?
I came at it at a very like enthusiast angle, where I only wanted to kind of gush about the stuff that I was interested in. I didn't even think about it from a games like journalism standpoint. That's like vocabulary that I was taught like 1 year into it. I'm like, this is supposed to be journalism? What are you talking about? For me, it was enthusiasm. It's like this is coming out. This is the shit. This is what we're going to be buying in 2 years. And, here's every little rumor, leak, and detail that I can find. And then I started doing the work, and I was like, this guy's just straight up lying. Like, this is not true. And then, so coming from an agency background, I could, and getting these press releases and starting to get all these lists, and then also like looking back into the magazines that I looked up to before, I was like, oh my God, there's so much bullshit. Like there's just a metric ton of bullshit between the lines here. So at some point, I just started covering the bullshit. I was like, this press release is obviously, this isn't true, and this is CGI, and this is pre-rendered, and this is not what I saw at the convention. And then the term at the time was new games media, where it was kind of like off-the-cuff reporting, and it's very short doses of truth, and the blogs were the ones that delivered that at the time. That was the only way you can get the truth at the time, and I was part of that ecosystem. And then there was this other kind of conversation about games. New games media is supposed to only be games journalism, and enthusiasm is not supposed to be part of that conversation, and that's not professional. And I never really knew which was what my reader wanted, so I tried to do both. We had the guys just doing the kind of like vanilla news with no opinion. These are the facts. This is what was said. Here you have it on a plate. And then I had the other guy saying, well, here's 3 words of what they said, but let me tell you what I think.
Yeah.
And then that became games blogging for a while, and then it moved on to YouTube, where you can get the inflection and the facial expression of the person that's doing it, and it's I feel like it's the majority of that has moved to YouTube, and that's where you can get that now. Like I said, I try to put on different hats, try to kind of ride that fine line between straight journalism and really enthusiastic games writing.
Well, it's funny because I know you mentioned like you felt like Destructoid was sort of like you're going to take magazines down, which I think you did win that fight. But like back in the day in magazines, like I at least I feel like there was more of a need for distinct voices, and I think like magazines started to recognize that like as print was beginning to fail, they kind of doubled down on the voices that they had established. But I don't know if you would agree with this or not, and I don't want to put you in a position where you're talking smack about other game sites, but to me it feels like there's kind of like a quote unquote universal voice across sites like Kotaku, Polygon, Verge, etc. So I mean, in addition to that, like there is very often the thing in the writer pool where people will go and write for one and then try to write for all of them. So I mean, like, are there ways that you feel like the games writing ecosystem is a little homogeneous?
It is, and I'll tell you why, or at least my opinion.
Sure.
It's the games writer that has been doing this for longer than 4 years. They are holding their tongue a little bit because they know that if they go too far to the edge, they become a liability to the publication. That's putting them in a kind of like a position that they don't want to be in, whether it's they don't want to deal with the social backlash of talking about some of these kind of uncomfortable things to that's just not the story they want to run. And then you also have the professional relationships that they've built over the years where they don't want to burn certain bridges, so they don't want to become that editor that does that and is feared for that. So then you have the outliers, right? You have the guys that are purely on funded by Patreon saying whatever, and there's absolutely zero consequence, and that's a completely different voice. I think that's really what's it, and it's not that these publications or these writers are not capable of going outside of that, but like if you want to kind of like not be the tall grass that gets chopped, that's where you land. You land in that kind of like kind of polite but kind of journal. I don't know.
I mean, do you agree with that assertion, or do you feel like there's more nuance to it, and I'm not giving enough credit?
I would say piece by piece. I think that the average person writing about games is a little frustrated that their editor is not more open to their ideas, and then the editor is frustrated that the writer is not being empathetic to the kinds of struggles that they face as a publisher that's just trying to keep people from falling off the cliff. So trying to, meeting each other halfway is a part of it. But going back to the magazines, like it drove me crazy for a really long time that like unfinished games that showed poorly at a trade show, Too Human being a classic example, that ends up getting a 5-page spread on, say, EGM cover story, and it's glowing. And the questions aren't that they're not saying this game looked like shit, this game looked like shit. It's very like, wow, making games is hard. And then the answer is like, well, we've hired 28 PhDs, so we're working on it. And yeah, there's a certain level of empathy, but like, God, like, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Like, you guys have spent $5 billion on this game and it looked like ass. Like, why is that not the headline? Like, why is that not on the cover? And then the answer is, well, the cover costs, $15,000, and every additional page is that. I was like, oh my God, this is the industry. So that was my beef with magazines. I was like, this is still going on, by the way. Oh.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because, I mean, it's been interesting for me interviewing people who were working in those magazines or were writing for places in the late 90s only in print, and we're starting to hear about this thing called the internet. I mean, do you feel like that kind of mentality has shifted much as far as like who game companies think games writing is ultimately responsible to? Like, I'm sure you remember the story about like Trip Hawkins, again, to bring up GamePro, writing, I don't know if it was real or not. People have told me it was real, but he wrote like some screed, like really agitated that GamePro had the audacity to give one of their games a bad review. I mean, do you feel like that's changed much as far as like game companies feeling who game sites are ultimately responsible to?
Yeah, I saw it happen in slow motion. It was hilarious. What's another good example? It was Sony had hired an influencer agency to make a fake blog about how cool the PSP is, and they had all these like fake bloggers writing this really, really funny like gamer slang. And then you go to the agency website, and it's the same guy's photos from the blog. It's senior data analyzer or whatever the title is. And they were so of course we all found out and we clowned them out about it, and they were so upset that they lost control of the message, because they had crafted this, and everybody signed off on this, and this is what the message was going to be for the consumer that we're selling this product to. We bought the media, we created the media, we were used to paying the magazines to deliver the message that we signed off on in the insertion order, and then they couldn't bottle it, they couldn't stop it, and then it went all over the place. And I feel like after that happened, everybody was like, whoa, let's try to have a conversation about the blog. And then following that year, we go to E3, and then there's this awkward thing called the Bloggers Breakfast. It was called the Bloggers Breakfast, and they got us all in the room. It was like 10 or 12 of us, the heads from all the major gaming blogs, and there weren't even you classify as old media in there. And we were having breakfast with I think it was like the head of the ESA, or I forgot who it was. And it was just the most bizarre thing where it's just like, let's be friends. Let's have some croissants. Like, what? I was like, you guys were pushing me out of your trade show a year ago. What happened? We're having breakfast now? Seriously?
Yeah.
And I don't know. And I feel like that was like that was like the beginning of the shift. And now PR companies can't wait to have Total Biscuit flown in to review their game before CNN or USA Today looks at the game, because a top YouTuber is in the room. Everybody clear the aisle. It's completely changed, and I find it hilarious.
I mean, do you feel like like as streamers and stuff, as they kind of pick up, I don't even know if it's like Slack, but I think they have kind of like occupied a certain space that a lot of blogs did when they started off. I mean, what do you feel like, if that's true, if they've kind of occupied a space that game sites used to? I mean, what do they kind of do a poor job of covering, or to say it more diplomatically, like what could they be doing a better job of covering or asking about or using that access for?
Sure. Well, I think one thing that's brilliant is YouTube as a platform, and kind of like the quick dose and the entertainment value that provides. That's been able to reach way more gamers or potential gamers than all the blogs and magazines combined have ever done in the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that the number one YouTuber is a game commentator or entertainer or whatever PewDiePie views his title is.
Ambassador?
Yeah, I guess that's
I'm kind of half joking, but it's kind of true.
That's exactly my point. He's been able to reach and kind of break down and communicate things that maybe these long thought pieces on even Destructoid have failed to do, where we try to explain that games are not just just shoot the guy and win. There's nuance and art and beauty behind all these games, and I don't think we can do that with just games writing. I think that that videos just brings that to so many people, and it's just my nephew, who doesn't read my site, he prefers to follow his favorite YouTubers. It's just a testament to just millennials, if you will, prefer that medium.